Hey everyone! On today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, I've got Umut Alamdar from the Security Lab here at Hornet Security back on the show, and today we're going to be talking about API-based email filtration versus the older DNS route-based email filtration. Which one's better, pros and cons, caveats, and lots more coming up in today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Hello everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the Security Lab here at Hornet Security. As always, I'm your host, Andy Surwich, and I've got one of our regular co-hosts on. I've got Umut Alamdar. How's it going, Umut?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Yes, it's always good having you. We have great conversations. So in the off chance that our listeners listening today or watching, if you're watching on YouTube, in the off chance that they don't know who you are, I don't know how that could be because you've been in so many of our episodes, but in the off chance that they don't know who you are, can you give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm Umut Alamdar, head of Security Lab at Hornet Security. I've been with the company for a little bit more than 10 years already. I'm responsible for the email security products here at Hornet Security, also for our spam mail lists, and just making sure that everyone, including our customers, have a safe and secure work environment.
You know, you're the perfect guy and the perfect skill set for today's topic. And you mentioned email security, and that is kind of what we're talking about today. And if I kind of put my old man hat on here for a second. I've been in the industry for 2-ish years now. I remember that even way back when we had this idea of DNS route-based email security, right? It's been around forever. But lately, the last couple of years now, we've kind of seen this rise in email scanning solutions that utilize an API instead in the case of 365, right? So 365, of course, has the Graph API. Security vendors can tie into that for security purposes. So it's brought up this whole conversation of like, okay, which is better? The old DNS route-based email security or this newer API-based email security? And that is, of course, our topic today. So I guess what I wanted to do, Umut, like I said, your background is perfect for this, is let's kind of compare the two. Talk about which is better in which situation, what are some of the caveats, pros, cons, that type of thing. And I think we've got a full episode with this topic. We could probably do a couple episodes on this topic, but I figure we would scratch the surface today. What do you think?
Sure, let's go.
Sounds good. So I wanted to start with, I guess, the new kid on the block, and that is the API-based email scanning that is done via 365. Now, just a quick overview of how this works, and jump in at any point if you feel like I'm leaving anything out, Umut, is I kind of mentioned already, there's APIs in 365 that security vendors can tie into. And of course, there's already the built-in Exchange Online Protection email scanning solution that every license in 365 gets. Even if you're using Exchange Online Plan 1, which is literally a mailbox, even with that license, you get Exchange Online Protection. And the way that this API-based approach works is the message gets delivered, and then the vendor can do a scan after the fact and pull out anything that's detected as malicious after the point of delivery. I think that's a good rough summary. What do you think, Umut? Did I leave anything out?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to engineering, we have to, so usually we differentiate between two approaches. There's this post-delivery approach that you mentioned. The email actually hits the user's inbox, and after that, the actual vendor gets a copy of the email for scanning purposes. And there's also something that some vendors start implementing. It's called the pre-delivery scanning method. This is when the incoming email is hidden in a folder that the user cannot see, and after scanning it gets moved to the inbox if it's not malicious. So we have to keep both approaches in mind. Most solutions work with the post-delivery attempt that you described. And even though the folder is hidden, the user may actually be able to access the incoming emails.
And that, I want to start by talking about the advantages, but while we're talking about that, again, putting my system admin hat on, that doesn't fill me with confidence that there's potentially a malicious piece of mail sitting in my user's mailbox, even for a limited amount of time. But we'll get to that. Or we'll get to that. Like I said, I want to start with the good stuff. I'm not knocking the API-based approach. There are merits to it, and there are pros to it. And the big one that I see is ease of setup. So again, we're comparing this with the way that we've historically done things, in that, okay, I've purchased this email scanning solution. The way that it's historically been done is like, okay, I'm going to update my MX record. I'm going to direct my mail flow through that service first, and then they'll deliver it to my mail server once all of the services have been run against it. The big advantage I see of this API-based approach is if I'm utilizing 365 for mail services, I choose an email scanning solution. I authenticate 365 to that scanning solution, and boom, done. The service is running, and I'm off to the races. And there's a lot of advantages there, not only just from ease of setup, but also from a trialing point of view as well, too, right? So I feel like, if I was still an admin in the trenches like I used to be, I was always hesitant to try new email scanning solutions, just because it was always a pain to go and update the MX record and potentially interrupt mail flow for a period of time just to trial a new solution, right? And the API-based method eliminates that pain for me, right? So what are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So onboarding is super easy with this API-based approach. You simply need to grant permissions to some kind of application that's going to be installed in your Microsoft tenant. What we have to keep in mind is that the API-based solution does not only exist for M365, but for example also for Google Workspace.
Right.
But the onboarding approach is very similar, if not even the same. So the admin grants permissions for the app, so that the app installed in the tenant can actually retrieve the emails and so on. You don't need to do any DNS configuration. You don't need to configure anything at all. After the onboarding, you can already start seeing some results in some kind of dashboard that displays the scanned email logs. So for doing proof of concepts, I think this is a very handy solution.
Right, definitely. And so that's a big advantage, but I see a lot of drawbacks for this method too. So I kind of mentioned one earlier already, right? And those vendors that are utilizing the kind of the post-delivery scanning method, yes, the email is getting filtered by Exchange Online Protection. Again, in the case of 365, which I think most of our listeners are probably using 365 in some way, shape, or form. There is a short period of time where, let's say, a malicious piece of mail gets through Exchange Online Protection. And I mean, Exchange Online Protection is decent. It's got a 99% detection rate, right? But that's not 99.9. And I mean, and even a 99% detection rate is still one malicious piece of mail through per every 100 messages, right? And you just think about your large organizations. When we start talking about economies of scale, that's a lot of malicious email getting let through. And so if I have a user that, again, timing is everything, but if they're just writing a message in Outlook or they're sorting mail, there are users that are on top of their email, like, as soon as stuff comes in, right? So, I mean, there's a potential timing issue there for me. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is one of the bigger drawbacks for these post-delivery scans that use the API to retrieve an email and so on, and to scan it, to mitigate it, to remove it, to even delete it and so on. And honestly, I don't think that this can be circumvented at all. So there's no mitigation for this. We also need to keep in mind the retrieval of the emails can also happen through journaling with M365. This is also something that some vendors use. So they get a copy of the email through journaling, scan it, and then delete the specific email from the inbox if it is malicious. And here you also have the dependency to Microsoft, because Microsoft needs to generate the journal message. This does not happen immediately after the acceptance of the email, so it can happen after a short delay of half a minute, maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and so on. And within this time frame, the email resides in the user inbox. So this is one of the shortcomings of the API-based solution.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a big one. And I mean, I guess if you're pairing it with other solutions, maybe it's a non-issue, but it's still just a big drawback for me. Couple other couple other things that I feel like are kind of missing when utilizing a scanning solution that solely leverages API-based scanning is you miss out on some of those things that your traditional DNS route-based security solutions do. Things like signatures and disclaimers. If I want to append signatures or disclaimers to every piece of mail as they leave the organization. There's a lot of solutions, third-party solutions that leverage their own encryption management for outgoing email. And I mean, yes, Microsoft has their own message encryption services. I think I mentioned to you before we hit record on this, I have some strong feelings about Microsoft's encryption management solution, and that it works, it's capable, but and I'm going to probably say this again later in this episode, like most features built into 365, it's designed for those mega corporations with large IT teams with siloed roles, and you probably have a person that manages mail encryption for your organization. When it comes to small businesses and those mid-sized businesses, when you've got administrators trying to wear multiple hats within their organization, it's not the easiest thing, is what I'm getting at. Whereas a third party makes it easy in that regard, right? That's part of the value of a third party there, right? Another thing that I'm thinking of off the top of my head is continuity services. So, and people are probably going to yell at the radio if they're listening to this podcast in their car, because I tell this joke all the time. If 365 becomes 364 in any given year, right, which is rare, but it does happen, a continuity service allows your users to still access their stuff, right? So, I mean, those are some of the big drawbacks that I see. Did I miss any that maybe you're thinking of, Yumu?
Yeah, in general, I mean, you described it quite well. The technical limitation that vendors have with the API-based solution is that they can't apply any manipulation to the email. Meaning, if the email is S/MIME or PGP encrypted, they can't decrypt it and then forward it to the user inbox. They can't add signatures to emails. They can't remove specific forbidden attachment types, for example, from the email. So any kind of manipulation is not possible. What we also have to keep in mind is that these API-based solutions most often don't even target that specific market. So they only go for email scanning. It's a very straightforward solution. Right. They simply enhance the Microsoft experience with additional spam filters, with some kind of next level threat detection or spear phishing filters, and that's it basically. So the API-based solution is very slim in regards to the feature set.
Right. And I guess if I ask myself the question, like, okay, who is this type of solution for? That brings into mind, like, okay, I'm maybe a small business, or I'm some organization that I already have existing tool sets in place for these other areas of security. If I just want to beef up my email security and that's it, maybe this the API-based method is a solution, right? So, interesting. Well, what do you think? Should we talk about the DNS routing method next?
Sure, yeah.
So we kind of talked about the API-based method, right? The new-ish way of doing things. Let's go and actually talk a little bit more about kind of DNS routing-based email scanning. And again, like we mentioned earlier, that is where me as the admin, I've signed up for new email scanning services. I'm going to update my MX record, point it to whatever vendor I'm using for email security services, and then the email gets delivered to that vendor. The vendor runs all their security services against it and then forwards it through to my mailbox, my mail server. And it goes the opposite direction on the way out, right? So if I'm sending email outbound, it'll route through that service and again do some cool things like signatures and disclaimers like we talked about earlier. That's the example I always think of. And then it gets delivered to wherever it's going from there. Now, there are a number of advantages to this method, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit already. And the big one for me is because it's kind of funny. I've become more cynical the older I've gotten in my career, in that I used to have a more, I don't know, I guess I would call cavalier attitude towards security in my younger days. I'm like, oh, that'll never happen. You know, the chances of somebody clicking on a message in the 2 minutes it's in their mailbox. You know, I've been in this industry long enough now to where those things that can, quote, never happen, they always happen in some way, shape, or form, right? So I leave nothing to chance these days. And I guess that's the big advantage to the DNS routing method of email security, is that all the filtration is done before that piece of mail even hits my mail server. I mean, for me, that's like the biggest thing. What do you think, Umut?
Yeah, absolutely. So usually these third-party DNS routing-based solutions reject incoming emails at their cloud, right? So your mail services don't even get to see a huge chunk of emails, of spam emails, for example, that would otherwise maybe lead to you running into rate limits. I think the rate limit at O365 is something like, correct me if I'm wrong, 3,600 incoming messages per hour or something like that?
I believe so. It's in that area.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this kind of solution actually helps you with it. And what we see is that many enterprises, medium and also large, do not only use O365 as a mail service, right? So yes, they have CRMs like Salesforce for incoming email, or they have other mail solutions also where they work with emails, service emails, ticketing systems, for example, Zendesk or any other kind of ticketing system. Here the DNS routed solution actually helps you to gain transparency into all of your incoming emails, meaning that you as an admin simply change the DNS record, the MX record for your domain, you route it through the third-party vendor, and then you get the full visibility on all incoming emails sent to these multiple services. So really, if you seek this transparency, I think DNS routed is the best way to go.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you brought up the rate limiting, because that's 3,600 messages per hour, I believe, is the case. And it seems like a lot, but if I've got a large company, or I'm doing something in my business that requires a large volume of email traffic, maybe I'm a realtor and I'm sending shipping notices, or the big one that I always look at is manufacturing. At least the manufacturers I've worked with have had a large volume of outgoing email traffic on parts updates, shipping notices, things like that, right? That 3,600 per hour does not seem like that high once you start thinking about, again, economies of scale, right? Whereas that's where, you know, the third-party vendor in this DNS routing-based security can kind of help manage that rate limiting a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Definitely.
if you follow that idea, with the API-based solution, you get to see all emails that your M365 tenant receives, right? And in the DNS routed solution, as I mentioned, this helps you actually manage emails sent to multiple platforms. Think about this from an admin point of view. With the API-based solution, you have maybe a ticket system that you need to manage for incoming emails. You have your tenant, maybe another solution too. And for each platform, you have a different administration panel. And in the DNS routed solution, you have it more or less consolidated. So you can control the email flows, see where you have problems and so on. So this helps quite a lot to also reduce costs if you need to manage multiple email services or servers.
That's true. That's a good point. And it's funny whenever we do these compare and contrast episodes like this, you know, we come prepared with our outline, right? But as we start talking about it, like these other pros and cons always surface themselves, definitely. So, I think the other advantage of a DNS routing-based solution, and we won't spend a ton of time on this because we've talked about this on this show ad nauseum, is the fact that a third-party solution in any security product really helps to keep Microsoft honest. And I mean, that's a question that has come up a lot over the last year or two in terms of security, especially with things like the Storm's 0558 breach. And I have to apologize to listeners. I know I keep pressing this button over and over again, right? I'll stop beating a dead horse, as we say here in the U.S., in that the security, Microsoft doing security has really come into question these last couple of years. And there is an inherent conflict of interest in the same organizations selling non-security products, in this case 365, and then also charging to secure said product, right? And so I mean, like, if there, it feels icky, right, from that regard. And when you're leveraging a third-party solution, in this case using a DNS-based email security routing solution, right, it provides that third-party eyeball on the whole process, right? And, you know, typically a third-party security vendor is going to have a higher detection rate than Microsoft will. I'll use us as an example. We have 99.9% detection rates as opposed to just 99% that Exchange Online Protection does. A lot of people don't think that extra 0.9 matters. It really does, though. Makes a big difference. So anyway, that's... Again, I won't go into much more detail on that. People who listen to the show know my thoughts and feelings on this particular topic, but I want to let you have a second to add in your 2 cents as well, Yumu.
Yeah, you mean now regarding DNS routing, right?
That and in that topic, but you know, kind of in regards to a third party doing it versus Microsoft handling it solely themselves.
Yeah, I think the as you described it well, right? So Microsoft has this big focus on being a platform for larger enterprises. I mean, when you look into the admin panel, you already know you need 1 year or more to learn everything to understand how to manage your tenant, and third-party solutions just add this layer of simplicity. In the end, most businesses, be it small and medium, get into M365 for email, for Outlook, Word, for OneDrive, SharePoint, and so on, and they don't want to deal with the other. Okay, Teams is also quite important nowadays, but they don't look into Jammer or something like that, any other kind of solution that comes with it. Most companies don't even look very closely into Azure stuff, right? And this is where most security issues lie in regards to Azure ID, authentication, and so on. And the third-party solution simply adds some kind of security layer on top. It helps you to administrate. Most modern solutions actually come with additional help tools for you that you can implement to secure your tenant quite well.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely, it's something that I think about often, and maybe I'm just weird, but it's this whole security ecosystem around 365 is something I think about often. So it's good to get your viewpoint on this as well. So, so we've kind of talked about the two methods, right? And I wanted to spend some time doing a little bit of a comparative analysis. I mean, a lot of the stuff we've kind of been doing a comparative analysis all along here, right? But to just kind of sum up a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, you know, let's talk about comparison in the effectiveness of threat detection. Well, we've kind of already pointed that out, right? There's a delay typically in the API-based method, which is a problem. impact on email system performance, and or the user experience. We've talked about the rate limiting issue. In terms of user experience, generally there's not going to be much that's all that different in the user experience. What do you think? Am I missing something there?
Yeah, in regards to the user experience, most API-based solutions actually use the native features for reporting spam, for example, within O365.
Right.
And in DNS routed solutions, the users get some kind of quarantine report to retrieve emails that got quarantined by the solution. Here we have to keep in mind that users need to learn how to handle these quarantine reports, but usually these reports enrich the user experience by also providing a way to preview emails in a safe environment.
Right.
So this actually it comes in quite handy. I'm also using this feature at our end quite often. Before I want to release an email from quarantine, I can actually look at the content in a secure and safe environment. And we also got positive feedback from our customers regarding this feature, right? So this is again something that there are things that users need to learn how to handle, but in the end it enriches the user experience quite well.
Right, and I like those quarantine reports, and I've leveraged them a lot over the years with various vendors. And what's really nice about it is it gives this sense of self-service to the end user. You know, they feel like they've got a little bit more control and can, that type of thing. And to me, again, using myself as an example, I go to a lot of conferences, so I always get when you go scan your badge at all the different vendors you talk with, ultimately you end up getting blasted with vendor email, right? And there are times where I have utilized a service like that to, you know what, I don't want to see those emails anymore. And it's really useful from that perspective, at least from looking at it from an ease of use point of view.
And I need to add something coming from a security guy. Usually the administrator can configure which type of emails can be released and previewed by the user, right? So the administrator can, under normal circumstances, configure that phishing emails or malicious emails can't be released by the users, but only some low severity spam emails. So this is also important just to have it mentioned, right?
Yes, that is a good point. You know, like if I'm the end user, click here for free Bitcoin, right? Oh, sure, why not? Anyway. Again, going through my comparative analysis list here, we talked about performance and end user impact, effectiveness and threat detection, scalability and adaptability in different organizational sizes. To me, when I look at this particular area, I think about the management burden, right? We've talked about this a little bit already. Again, most services in 365 are designed for those large organizations that have wide and well-skilled IT staff. And for those organizations that don't, it becomes a problem to learn all these different services in 365, whereas a third party, the value they bring to the table, not only in the security expertise, but they also bring value in simplifying those security solutions from a management perspective. In terms of scalability, again, this is a technical podcast, so I always, when I see scalability, I'm thinking about like impact on, server resources. In this case, it's 365 we're talking about, so that's not really a consideration. The other area we've got to talk about here is compliance and privacy considerations. Again, I know I've touched on this point a couple of times. From a compliance standpoint, if there's even a tiny bit of time that an end user could interact with a bad email, I'm not liking that from a compliance standpoint. Privacy considerations, I'm not sure if there's any privacy considerations that are worth mentioning. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, what we have to keep in mind is, so this is very theoretical right now. Some organizations managing critical infrastructure it may require to deliver emails using specific encryption methods, specific algorithms like TLS 1.3 or something like that, using specific email encryption, SMIME, and so on. Now imagine your organization communicates with a different organization yet that uses this API-based approach. You configured everything well, your company communicates encrypted, it's compliant to the policies, right? Now you have this third-party vendor who retrieves the emails through the API. This path from M365 to the vendor may not be compliant anymore. So this is something that you always need to keep in mind. The DNS-based solution might be better for this kind of scenario, because with the DNS-based solution, you can normally enforce specific encryption policies. And these will then be respected. You don't have any other way to retrieve the email from the tenant, more or less. So there's no third-party vendor that can read emails from the inboxes using an encryption algorithm or encrypted channel that's not compliant to the policies that you need to adhere.
That's a really good point, because if I'm using the route-based method, I'm just worrying about and making sure that the mail flow is compliant, like we've always done. Whereas utilizing an API-based method, okay, I've got the separate channel over here I now have to worry about as well.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So the final area I wanted to bring up with the time we have left is the question of why not both? And I think of that that one GIF that is floating around the internet, right? The little girl with her hands, kind of like this. Why not both, right? And so why not both? I mean, there's advantages to both. There's cons to both. So we have this idea now of this hybrid approach, and I think this hybrid approach is useful. And I know, again, I always use us as an example on these podcasts, right? We have the ability to do this hybrid approach here at Hornet Security. So, I mean, there's advantages, right? And I'll let you kind of have the first word on this one.
Yeah, sure. When we refer to the hybrid approach and both, we need to differentiate what we mean by that, right? So we don't mean retrieving emails through the API, for example. We just mean, so if we consider the route of an email, so the company uses a DNS-based solution, meaning the email arrives at the third-party vendor's secure email gateway in the cloud. They scan the email, apply some policies, your encryption policies, and so on. And then the email is delivered to M365.
Right.
The hybrid solution then is capable of using the API of M365 to, for example, to retrieve phishing emails or malicious emails that it classified malicious at a later date. So some minutes later or something like that, maybe an anomaly got detected, and then it's capable of clawing back the email that it delivered to the user inbox, using the same approach that the API-based approach would use.
Right.
And this is quite handy also in regards to the onboarding, right? So we talked about the administrator needing to change DNS settings to use the DNS routed solution. But there's way more than that. The administrator also needs to change the firewall policies for the email server to allow incoming traffic from the vendor. And you also need to do something like that for the connectors in M365, right? So you only want to receive emails from the vendor and not from the internet to avoid that spammers can directly deliver emails to you. And this can also be automated via the hybrid approach using the APIs at M365 or Google Workspace. So it combines the best from both worlds. Right.
And I think that's the important takeaway there, right? You get the best of both worlds. And the example that you had mentioned, clawing back an email that is later determined to be malicious, the example I always think of is threat actors love to send through emails with URLs that are not yet activated, right? So, when they come through, maybe the URL is completely benign. There's nothing wrong with it, right? And then they arm it at a later date, right? So I could see it being really useful from that perspective as well. So in terms of excuse me, in terms of losing anything, you're not really losing anything with a hybrid approach, I don't think. No, I mean, you get like we said, we get the best of both worlds, so you're not losing anything. So that was the final question I had on my notes here. So, well, Umut, I think that's our episode. Anything you want to add before we sign off here? I think we covered a lot of ground here in today's episode.
Yeah, maybe just one additional comment in regards to the hybrid approach, because this has been a topic in my team today too. Threat remediation. So imagine you manage a tenant, and you need to, you know some users received some kind of malicious emails, right? This third-party solution did not detect it as such. Microsoft also didn't detect it as such. You need a way to remove emails from the user inboxes, right? So maybe 10, 20, 30 users receive these emails. And you can also usually do this via the hybrid approach and also the API-based approach. So usually these services come with some kind of dashboard that allows you to remediate threats from the user inboxes. And this is also one huge benefit for administrators or security teams and so on. And often people don't realize that this is a thing and this is a huge need for security teams. So just to complete the whole picture, I wanted to mention that threat remediation is also a huge topic.
That's a good point, because I feel like so often in the security space, we focus so much on keeping everything out, which we should. That's part of security, right? But at the same time, like, threat remediation is part of the security life cycle too, right? So I'm glad you brought that up. Well, I want to say thanks for taking the time to come talk to us today. It's always good having you, my friend. I'm sure we'll be talking about this topic more in the future as well. So thanks for being here, as always.
Thank you, Andy.
Definitely. And those of you watching, I appreciate you spending some time with us. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We are available out on YouTube and the various podcasting platforms. So chances are you can find us wherever you consume your podcast media. And, in terms of learning more, if you'd like to learn more on this topic, you can always go out to hornetsecurity.com. We've got all kinds of information out there, not only on our products, but on some of the stuff that we talked about today. I'll also link to the official documentation in the support section of our website that talks about some of this stuff as well too. Other than that, stay safe out there, have a good one, and we will catch you next week for the next episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Have a good one.